Hello, America. I'm Mark Levin. This is Life, Liberty, and Levin. Senator Ron Johnson, how are you, sir?
Great. Nice to be here.
It's a pleasure. Republican, Wisconsin. One of the reasons I wanted you here is because 2 Sundays ago, when you tried to actually talk and explain yourself or meet the press, Chuck Todd kept cutting you off. And I thought it would be important to bring you back here on my program to hear what you had to say, but also because of your position in the United States Senate. You're the chairman of a committee that sort of oversees the activities with Ukraine in the United States, among other positions you hold in the United States Senate. Now, we have this document that came out, the president's phone call, a transcript of it, with the president of Ukraine back in July. And people are trying to, Democrats in the media in particular, say that the president was seeking a quid pro quo. I don't read this in here. You have some background on this. You had a meeting with the president and others in May of this year. You want to tell us about it?
Sure. Well, again, and just on that transcript, I read that, and I think it's a pretty gracious phone call on the part of the president. But I went to Ukraine on May 20th to attend the inauguration of President Zelensky. I went there with Secretary Perry, Gordon Sondland, who was the ambassador to the European Union, and Kurt Volker, who's a special envoy to Ukraine. So the 4 of us were pretty much that delegation. We felt it was important coming back. We were pretty impressed with Zelensky. We thought it was important to meet with the president and really get him supportive of Ukraine. And so we had a meeting in the Oval Office on May 23rd.
Of this year.
And again, just making that point, we really had a couple asks. I mean, invite Zelensky to the Oval Office as quickly as possible to show support and appoint an ambassador that could get strong bipartisan support. Again, we just really were encouraging the president to show strong support for the people of Ukraine. I was certainly surprised at the president's reaction, which has been consistent throughout this. Now, first of all, he talked about the level of corruption in Ukraine. And Mark, there's all kinds of smoke about Hillary Clinton campaign, the DNC being involved in the 2016 election. But again, that's specific, but just general. President Zelensky got a mandate from the Ukrainian people, 73%, to end the corruption in Ukraine. So it's obvious Ukraine's a corrupt place, and any president ought to be asking a pretty hard question: is this a place where we really ought to be providing a lot of support to? And then secondly, and he's been very consistent on this, why isn't Europe stepping up to the plate? Why aren't they showing the kind of support? So those were his 2 main reasons. And so I think the 4 of us left that meeting realizing we've got a sales job to do. We all supported Ukraine. We wanted to make sure the president was supportive of it. And that was the first start of certainly my knowledge of the fact that President Trump had some real reservations about providing full support for Ukraine.
Full support for Ukraine. So he had reservations about sending money to a corrupt...
We weren't even talking about that at that point in time.
So you weren't even talking about any support for a corrupt regime. He viewed it that way. And plus, where's Europe? Why aren't they stepping in? I mean, after all, Ukraine is a bulwark against Russia, as an example. So that's, as you point out, pretty consistent with how the president thinks about NATO. Why aren't they stepping up, or Syria, or whatever it is? So it seemed pretty neutral in the sense of he wasn't seeking anything from anybody. This is just his viewpoint.
Right.
Now, later you had a phone call with the president on August 31st of this year. Tell me about that, and why was there a phone call?
Well, I had a trip scheduled to visit President Zelensky in Ukraine on September 5th of this year. And the day before, or a couple days before, I had heard that the president was considering or was withholding some of this military support, which, by the way, he's provided the lethal defensive weaponry that Obama didn't provide. So he's already provided this in the past. But now he was reconsidering end of the fiscal year. And so I'd first called up Gordon Sondland the day before, asking what was happening here. And it was at that point... Ambassador Sondland. And during that conversation, I can't tell you exactly how Gordon described this, but there was something in the works. So they're trying to do something, President Zelensky would have to do something in order to really free up that support. But anyway, I put in a request to talk to the president, and he called me back on the following day on August 31st. And I was trying to convince the president in that phone call to give me the authority a few days later to say the support's on its way. I'm trying to talk the president into it. once again, the president was incredibly consistent. Said, Ron, I mean, you know how corrupt a place this is. You know, so he made that point, and then he really hammered on the lack of European support. He talked about Angela Merkel. You know, Ron, I asked Angela, you know, why don't you fund these things? And he says, you know, Angela tells me because you guys will. I said, Ron, we're schmucks. We're schmucks. So that was the reason he gave me. I then brought up this rumor I'd heard that was, is there something in the works? Is there, I mean, does Zelensky have to do something, or do Ukraine have to show you something in order for this support to be released? And that is where he made the adamant, the vehement, angry denial. And again, I described it as expletive deleted. No way. No, I would never do that. Who told you that? At which point I felt a little guilty. Well, it was Gordon. But that was that conversation. I went on the record, I guess last Friday, with the Wall Street Journal, laying that out after the texts between Gordon Sondland and Kurt Volker were made public. I thought it was important to have on the public record that when I spoke to the president, well before this whistleblower complaint was made public, out of the blue, he didn't know I was going to raise that issue. His immediate reaction was an adamant, vehement, and angry denial. No, I would never do that. So I thought it was important to get that fact out on the table.
I think it's crucial. I just want to underscore the point. In May, he says, look, I'm concerned it's corrupt over there, and why doesn't Europe step up and give them support? You talked to him on August 31st, he says basically the same thing. I already told you, Ron, he says, they're corrupt over there. Where the hell's Merkel in Germany? Let them provide him with support. Never discussed with you any kind of quid pro quo. Is that correct?
Correct. I'm the one that raised the issue from my phone call with Gordon Sondland. Again, I wasn't quite sure what was in the works, so it's all rather nebulous, but you know, I described it enough where he got ticked off. I mean, he did not like hearing that, and he vehemently denied it.
And it wasn't until, my recollection is, September 9th, give or take, it could have even been later, that we begin to learn about this so-called whistleblower. There are leaks coming out of Capitol Hill, that a document is sent to them on the 9th, and the Intelligence Committee, according to the timeline. So it's not the president coming up with an after-the-fact explanation for what took place. It's the president of the United States doing exactly what the president has said since, which is, no, they got the support, but I needed to make sure they weren't going to basically, you know, run away with the money. They weren't going to abuse the money. And also, we wanted support from other allies.
By the way, there is a fair record of U.S. support getting wasted in Ukraine, just going to banks and not anybody knowing where that ever goes to. So again, there's a history of this, and there's no dispute that there's a lot of corruption in Ukraine. So it's a legitimate concern the president had, and he was consistent in expressing that concern.
You're a United States Senator. You hold a couple of powerful positions in the United States Senate. One of them is your relationship with Ukraine. You've been there several times, you told me. You kind of know the actors over there. You have discussions with the President of the United States in real time on this support, on this aid. You're trying to lobby him to provide it. He eventually does, having absolutely nothing to do with a whistleblower or whatever. And yet your message is being drowned out. There's static out there. They'd rather listen to Adam Schiff trying to connect the two, trying to push a quid pro quo. There's no quid pro quo in this telephone call. You're telling me now, back in May of this year, August 31st of this year, you talked to the president. Nothing of this sort ever came up. It was a consistent argument he made. They're corrupt. I don't want to just give them money. And where the hell are the Europeans? Is that correct?
Yeah, and Mark, you know, I'm from the private sector. You know, once I entered the public realm, what has really been reinforced to me, because I listen to you, I listen to Rush, I'm a fan.